Well, thank all of you for joining us. I'm really glad to be here with my colleagues from Team Maryland, Congressman Hoyer, the dean of our delegation, Congressman Ivey, who represents this district that is home to NASA Goddard. And we just had a very good meeting with the team at NASA Goddard. And I know I can speak for all of us when I say every time I come to NASA Goddard, I am impressed by the excitement, by the energy, by the curiosity, and the patriotism of every single one of the people who work at NASA Goddard. And if you look at what NASA Goddard does, it is the heart of the space science mission around the country. And the space science mission around the country is absolutely the foundation to everything else we do in space. I mean, you can't really talk about the rest of the space program without having the scientific basis of what you're doing, without having the knowledge of what you're doing. And that science and knowledge has also produced incredible benefits for our country in the area of technology, in the area of engineering, in the area of innovation across the board. And if you cut the science programming in half, you hurt our country in many ways. You hurt our national security, you hurt our innovation economy, you hurt our leadership around the world. And I think it is worth emphasizing that if America steps back from space science, others will quickly fill the void. In fact, they're already doing that. I mean, China is already working on mimicking the success of the U.S. space program over time, including the success of our space science programs. We will lose engineers. We will lose others to China. And in fact, they are launching a major space science exploration initiative. So this is no time for the United States to retreat when it comes to space science. And yet that is exactly what the proposed Trump budget cuts would do. They would be that mark a big American retreat from science and all the benefits of science. I just want to mention a couple of the projects that we are talking about that they put on the chopping block. And as you probably saw, they cut the science investment by about half overall. They took an especially big bite out of the astroscience programs, including the Nancy Roman telescope. Now, this is a model of the Nancy Roman telescope. And this program is on time, and it's on budget, and it's scheduled for a launch in fall of next year. And it will dramatically expand our capabilities to look into our solar system and our universe. And it will also bring all the other technological benefits that go with this kind of scientific enterprise. This project, the Nancy Roman project, despite it being on time and on budget, and something that will be a huge force multiplier for our space program, they are proposing to cut. They're proposing to zero it out. We saw it. We saw the clean room. We saw that this is almost finished. And yet they're talking about flushing all those taxpayer dollars down the drain. Mm-hmm. All of them down the drain. The next project to this would be the Habitable Worlds Project. So we had Hubble, we have Webb, we have Nancy Roman telescope, which will expand some of the capabilities of Webb. But the next big follow-on project is Habitable Worlds, which, as the name suggests, is an effort to look for life elsewhere in the universe, to determine if it's there. It was the top recommendation, Habitable Worlds, of the National Academy of Sciences decadal survey. So every decade, the National Academy of Sciences decides what projects are most important to U.S. leadership in space. They chose the Habitable Worlds Project as their number one priority. That is going to be headquartered here at NASA Goddard. So the Trump budget also proposes to close that down, among others. Let me just end with this. We were just talking to some of the great scientists here who told us that they were inspired to become NASA scientists and Goddard scientists because of their exposure to science growing up. They have 400 interns every year here at NASA Goddard. So when you pull the plug on major space science, it's like eating your seed corn. It is so damaging to our entire ecosystem when it comes to American leadership and innovation in this area. So we will fight these proposed cuts every step of the way, and I do believe and hope that we'll have bipartisan support in pushing back against these proposals. And with that, let me introduce somebody who has been a leader on the House Appropriations Committee for a very, very long time, and the Dean of the Delegation, Steny Hoyer. Steny?
Thank you very much, Senator. I had the great privilege of representing Goddard for 42 years. So I've been here a lot, and I know the extraordinary work that goes on here. The extraordinary work that we cannot predict the specific advances that this will make in science and technology and the economic impact it will have, but we do know from the many past years of NASA that they will occur, even though we may not know them specifically. I am pleased to join Glenn Ivey, who now represents this area. But he and I think Prince George's County as a unit, not as a single or two units. And we represent them together. And I am so glad to be on Team Ivey with respect to Goddard Space Flight Center. Let me say, I was a colleague of Bill Nelson's. Some of you may remember Senator Nelson. Senator Nelson served in the House of Representatives, and I served with him. And he then went to the United States Senate. And then he went to space. He was the senator in space. And he came back, and he was one of the great proponents, not only of Goddard Space Flight Center, but all of the NASA components. And then, of course, he became the administrator of NASA in the last administration. He heard about this proposal, and here's what he said. They're going to run NASA into a very deep ditch if they proceed with this kind of savagery. His words, not mine. He went on to say, if you savage NASA science, you have savaged our entire exploration program, and that will affect the human exploration program as well, which is essentially, Senator, what you said. We've seen over the last 3 months an effort to essentially disassemble American enterprise, American government, American progress by a group that who knew everything about how they were going to do it and do it quickly. But as in this instance, in almost every instance in which they've undertaken, they do not know the consequences. And the consequences will be dire, as Senator Nelson said, with respect to Goddard Space Flight Center. This center is the envy of one of our greatest competitors, China. This enterprise is going to be critical as we compete with China in science and in space and in technology. To disassemble this, to cut it in half, and Senator Van Hollen made the point that we were going to abandon the investment that's already been made. Now let me say what that investment is. $3 billion has gone into the Roman telescope and the Look for Habitable Worlds, Senator. What they're cutting is $600 million, which is the completion of this program, as Senator Van Hollen said, on budget. What a penny wise and pound foolish that decision would be. I am going to urge, Senator Van Hollen's going to urge, and Glenn Ivey is certainly going to be leading the pack for the Congress not to do this, and I project the Congress is not going to do this because it makes no economic sense, it makes no competitive sense, it makes no national security sense for them to do this. The people who are doing this know the cost of everything and the value of nothing. We need to make sure that America continues to be a leader in space, a leader in culture, a leader in economics. This center is absolutely critical to be able to make the further investment to complete a project, which, as you said, was on budget and so far on time. So I'm pleased to join my two colleagues, Senator Van Hollen and Congressman Ivey. We are going to fight this with every fiber in our bodies because America, future success, and national security depend upon it. Now let me yield to my dear colleague, Glenn Ivey, who, while a new member of Congress, as a member, worked for the Congress for many, many years, has had extraordinary experience in our state and around the country, and who is an extraordinary partner of mine as we represent not only with Senator Van Hollen and Senator also Brooks, our districts and our state, but also the national interest. Congressman Ivey.
Thank you. This is a competition right now that's going to have historic consequences. This is a fork in the road for the United States of America. Are we going to decide that we want to continue to maintain the lead in science and technology over the rest of the world or not? Because right now, China's right at our heels. They're pushing resources, investment, far beyond what the United States is doing. In fact, the current administration is cutting back on the kind of investments we need to be making. Here at NASA, they're cutting back. At universities across the country, including Johns Hopkins and University of Maryland right down the street, they're cutting back. For grants and scholarships so people can continue moving forward and getting their educations so they can go into these fields, they're cutting back. And if they keep cutting back, we're going to fall behind. So it's critical for us to make sure we move forward with these investments, because we're going to need to make sure that we are in the lead when we move forward. If you look back at what's going on right now, based on the investments we made before here at NASA, yes, University of Maryland, the incubator they've got, the spinoffs they've done, the quantum computing company, IonQ, is right down the street. AI is critical to where we're going to go. We don't know how it's all going to play out, but we know that we've got to keep doing the work and the research and the study so we can find and make those new discoveries and make sure we stay in the lead. So I'm urging the Trump administration to rethink this cut for the reasons that you've heard from my two colleagues here. It's devastating for NASA, devastating for science, and devastating for the United States of America. So with that, I'll stop for questions.
Senator Van Hollen, it's been
Yeah.
reported that Goddard Space Flight Center would actually close. Is that actually on the chopping block, or is it just...
Well, we haven't seen that in the proposal, but if you look at the impact of their proposed cuts, it would decimate the mission of NASA Goddard and would have all the harmful consequences that we've talked about. We asked some of the scientists what would be the impact of a 50% cut on the science budget, and their answer was it would actually go far beyond that in terms of just being the death bell for NASA Goddard.
This is located in Prince George's County. What is the impact for local residents? And if you could also comment on the Salvadoran president saying he will not return from Omar Garcia.
Well, let me take that last question last after we focus on questions here. But I want to. It would clearly have a harmful impact on our local economy, regional economy, and all the people who work at NASA. But I want to stress the fact that it will have really harmful impacts for every single American, for all the reasons we've said, because the work they do here is essential to our success in space and our success when it comes to innovation and technology. But let me turn it over to the individual who so well represents this congressional district, Glenn Ivey.
Thank you. I mean, one of the things to keep in mind now is that we live in a global economy. And so when they talk about making cuts and shutting down offices here in the United States, I guess they're just assuming that people will move to other NASA installations. But that's not necessarily the case. And one of the articles I saw over the week, it was written by a young scientist who's coming out of the PhD program. He's starting to look overseas. Him and his classmates are looking at going to Europe and India and other places because there's more stability there, there's more funding that's going into these support for these positions. And it's hard to build a career in science and technology in the United States already. So making it even harder means we're pushing them away. True for corporations as well. There's a lot of businesses that do work directly connected to NASA. In fact, the only reason they're here is because of the NASA Goddard installation. We need to make sure we support those. And they also create an ecosystem that's really beneficial with the University of Maryland, with the Army Research Lab, with Johns Hopkins APL right up the street, NSA and cybersecurity. We have all these assets that are working together, doing great work on behalf of the American people. If you start breaking the components out, it undermines the great work that they've been doing to keep America safe and keep us in the front of technological advancement.
Let me just add just a short word. Goddard is one of the largest aggregations of engineers, scientists, and technologists in the world. The thought that you can break this up and year by year do something and don't do something. As I said, $3 billion has already been invested in Roman. Extraordinary important project. They're cutting $600 million, which will finish the project. So they're going to leave on the table. And as Glenn Ivey said, there are literally, I want to say thousands, but certainly in the high hundreds of individuals throughout the country that work in collaboration with Goddard. They provide materials for Goddard, they provide expertise for Goddard, they provide people who can come here to learn what Goddard does. So this is not just about federal employees or just about Goddard Space Flight Center. This is about a nationwide effort to have a premier Earth sciences operation, looking back not only at Earth, but also looking at perhaps other Earths, and looking far back in time to see what that can teach us about how we make ourselves safer, more successful, and more healthy.
Senator Van Hollen, I'm curious, I've noticed that the cuts apply to here in Maryland, at Goddard, at JPL in California, both blue states. We haven't seen the same kind of cuts in Texas or Alabama or some of the other NASA centers. I wonder if you could comment on that. I believe this is some kind of a blue state payback from the Trump administration.
Well, look, we are going to be looking very carefully at the distribution of the cuts. What we're seeing in many parts of the Trump administration and conduct of the Trump is political retribution against various people. I will say that if it comes down to these budgetary decisions, we're going to fight back already, but you can be sure that we will make the case that political retribution has no place in the appropriations process. And I will tell you this, I think our Republican Senate colleagues and Republican House colleagues recognize that that is a very dangerous road to go down, not just for now, but for the future. And I've already met with my counterpart on the Appropriations Committee, subcommittee for CJS, prior to these most recent announcements. And he, I believe, fully understands the importance of the Goddard space science mission.
Republicans are going to support you then?
I believe that Republicans will recognize that a 50% cut to the NASA science budget is harmful to the national security and other interests of the United States.
Yeah. Also, let me add the concept that you've got a pod here, a pod there, and a pod here, Texas, wherever state you use, or Maryland, they are interrelated. They are not doing the same things, but those things are related to one another. They learn from one another, and they are critical to one another. So believing that you can cut off the science part, now every part has science, but cut off one wing is a foolish and wrong concept. It will adversely affect, and that's why Bill Nelson said it's going to affect all of NASA.
Yeah. I do think that that's part of it. I mean, if you look at Project 2025, they talk about privatizing many important public goods, including, for example, at NOAA, right? They want to privatize the National Weather Service. That's laid out very clearly in their plan. I would point out that NASA Goddard plays an important role in servicing those launching and servicing those satellites for NOAA as well. So there's no doubt that when you have a billionaire cabinet and when you have the folks who were sitting behind President Trump on his inauguration day include Elon Musk, the richest person in the world who has a direct interest in space, that yes, I think part of their motivation here is to attack the heart of the NASA Space Science Enterprise in order to contract it out ultimately to themselves. That would be a huge mistake. We all recognize that. I mean, the reason we have NIH do basic medical research and we have places like Goddard do this kind of research is because it is a public good. And there are a lot of people that want to later cash in on its benefits. We want to make sure the American people are the folks who are benefiting from this public investment, as they have been.
If I could just one quick point on that. The privatization piece, not just here at NASA, but across the board in science, the thing they seem to be missing is that a lot of the initial research isn't immediately profitable. So some of the private companies that they're assuming would pick this up, their shareholders would never let them do it because they wouldn't be able to show a quarterly or yearly benefit necessarily. Some of the research takes decades to accomplish. Now, after they do the research and they spin that off, that's when there's a commercial benefit for many of those in the private sector. But if we don't have these kinds of installations right now, for NASA here, NIH for that type of research, University of Maryland, the quantum field that they spun off later, you might not get it done in the time frame that you want, and we might get beat out again by China or India or some other country.
Any other questions on this topic? And then if not, we can go to the other. Yeah.
Now, I'll follow up question, but one question on this, if you don't have it. You said that this was a good meeting. Could you describe why you thought that?
Sure. We met with the top leadership here at NASA Goddard, and they went over all of their programs and described very clearly why these were of benefit to the United States and to the people of the United States. And as I mentioned, we paid special attention to the Nancy Roman telescope project because we could see it through the large, glass windows, that it is just about ready to go. I mean, it is supposed to launch in the fall of next year, and it's on budget. And they went into great detail about why this is important to the country. I mean, a lot of the technology you have, like the camera in the phone you're using right now, is really a spin-off of the space science programs over time. We benefited from the GPS systems. A lot of these discoveries were made in the course of the scientific enterprise, including the space science enterprise.
I want to make a point for you. I want to make it clear. This meeting and visit to Goddard was at our request. They answered questions that we asked them. They were not initiating this meeting. They were not initiating information to us. They were not lobbying us. Glenn and I represent it. The senator represents it. I've represented it for a very long time. This is an important center for our country, not just for the state of Maryland, not just for our district, for the country. But the leaders here and the scientists here simply were responding to our requests and our questions.
Yeah, just to emphasize things. I mean, this is an apolitical group. What they care about is the work that they do on behalf of the country. One of the people we met with, and I'd met her before, I think my colleagues, is Amber Strawn, and I think she's an important, hers is an important story as to why we need to do the work like they do here to get the next generation of scientists. She grew up in Arkansas, and she saw some of the early pictures from the Hubble Space Telescope, and they just sparked her imagination and curiosity, and years later she became the program manager for the Webb Space Telescope. that pipeline of talent and science will dry up if you cut the budget in the way they're talking about. Any other questions on that? And my colleagues are welcome to stick around for the other questions. We all represent the family of Kilmar Abrego Garcia.
Yeah, I guess we wanted to see if you had a response to the remarks about the Salvadoran leader at the White House today that he could not help effectuate the return of the Maryland citizens.
Well, I just want to emphasize a couple points. Number one, the courts of the United States have determined, and the Trump administration has admitted, that he was wrongfully apprehended and illegally deported to El Salvador. Number one. They've admitted that that was a mistake. So you've got a Maryland man who's the father of 3, illegally detained in a notorious prison in El Salvador. And the Supreme Court, in a 9-0 decision, you don't see those very much, agreed with the lower federal court judge, Judge Zinnes, that he had been wrongfully detained and ordered the Trump administration help facilitate his release. Now, I saw the comments of President Bukele, and I look forward to meeting with him. I've requested to meet with him. I reached out to the ambassador here to ask to meet while he's here. But I've also made clear if we can't meet here, I do intend to go to El Salvador to discuss the release of this individual who is illegally detained in El Salvador. And I believe the president of El Salvador will recognize why it's important to allow him to return to the United States of America. You know, the United States and El Salvador have had a strong relationship over many years. The United States provides lots of support to El Salvador. That support is not merely an issue for the executive branch. All of us, as members of the Appropriations Committee, also support whatever foreign assistance budget goes forward. So I believe that the president of El Salvador will reconsider when he understands the full story of this illegal detention. I don't think he wants to essentially be the president who's kidnapped a United States citizen. It was the fault of the Trump administration for sending him there illegally, but he shouldn't spend one extra day in a notorious prison in El Salvador when the president of El Salvador can let him go.
I'd like to comment on that. It is astonishing that the Trump administration continues to pretend like they can't have this man brought back. President Trump could direct him to bring him back. The Attorney General can direct him to bring him back. Instead, it looks like they're trying to force a constitutional crisis and force the Supreme Court to order it directly. But we do extraditions all the time. The United States has people brought back to the United States. Usually they're criminals and there's some kind of indictment over their head. In the instance where this is an innocent man who's done nothing wrong and the government admitted that they made a mistake in sending him, this should have happened days ago, and there's no excuse for dragging their feet anymore.
Senator, when will you make that decision to possibly go and speak with the president of El Salvador?
Well, I'm trying to meet with him. I'm trying to meet with him while he's here. As you know, he arrived just the other night. He came to Andrews Air Force Base in the state of Maryland, meeting with the president. So my first choice would be to meet him while he's here. But if he won't meet or can't meet, I intend later this week to travel to El Salvador and seek a meeting with the president or other government officials, because it is absolutely unjust and illegal to have this Marylander detained one more day in a notorious prison in El Salvador. As Congressman Ivey said, I mean, I want to underscore, of course President Trump could have just said, bring him home. Of course he could have done that. But this is an administration that has lied about Mr. Abrego Garcia, right? The Vice President of the United States tweeted out that he had a criminal record. That was a lie. They're just lying. They've gotten caught lying. They don't want to admit it. And they have an obligation to bring him home. But I will say the president of El Salvador should not now take it upon himself to say that he is detaining him for one more day, because that is kidnapping. I understand that the Attorney General said that we would provide a plane to bring him home. So all the president of El Salvador has to do now is hand over and release an innocent man and let him come home to his family.
Let me just say it. It is not credible that the President of the United States calls up the President of El Salvador and the President of El Salvador says no. Just not believable. Here, we are an exceptional nation. One of the reasons we're an exceptional nation is because we honor due process to every individual. They ought to bring this fella home, where he can get due process, and he can show that the administration is either lying or mistaken. We probably share the same view, but it is not credible. Bring him home.
What kind of message does he send if he decides to continue down this road, ignoring the court order, not actually calling on the president of El Salvador to release him back to the United States? And also, if the president of El Salvador refuses to meet with you, what will you do if you go to El Salvador? What would your objective be?
Well, my objective would be to make it clear that people of the United States, people of Maryland, his family, are not forgetting him, locked away illegally in one of the most notorious prisons in El Salvador. So it would be to continue to make sure that we focus on his health and well-being and his release back to his family until that happens. This is unsustainable. I mean, the Trump administration's position, in my view, is absolutely unsustainable, as is the position of the president of El Salvador if he's going to say that he's not going to release this man who our own courts, 9-0 on the Supreme Court, have said really should be coming home now. And I do want to, I would say with respect to what do we do, I saw that the families, the lawyers have asked that the administration lawyers be held in contempt, and I think that's an absolutely appropriate move to take right now. They are clearly just snubbing their nose at the courts, including the Supreme Court. And the courts, in my view, need to exercise their ability to sanction people who ignore court orders. Well, as I said earlier, you can be sure that when the Trump administration submits its budget request, we're talking about the budget request now, for NASA and Goddard, which they've cut, but when they submit their budget request, you can be sure it will include support for the government of El Salvador, for El Salvador. That goes through all of us. That goes through the Congress. And I want to very clearly, diplomatically, but very clearly, let the president of El Salvador know that Congress has a direct say in that support for El Salvador.
Thank you
so much.
Good.
Unbelievable, these guys. Good job.
Well, Coleman.